name is Karim, and this is my story on planet Earth. I'm a photographer and filmmaker, and I spend much of my time documenting the lives of whales, the giants of our ocean. I'm also fascinated with deserts, ice worlds, and volcanoes that spill their molten guts across the land, as well as the many animals on Earth, from the majestic elephant and lion to the bugs and lizards beneath our feet. Why do I take all these photos and videos? In the beginning, it was just for the sake of beauty and art, but I've since realized how fragile these places are and the urgent need for conservation. But this is also a planet full of people, and we are not separated from nature. We are a part of it. My life's work is to connect humans and nature through the power of storytelling, to give a voice to those that don't have one, be it plant, animal, or human, so that all life may thrive on this blue marble floating in space.
This is Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, and I'm your host, Richard Wiese. Scratch the surface of an explorer and you'll find an adventure and a great story. This show is about their tales. This podcast is a proud supporter of the Explorers Club and the EC50 Initiative, 50 people changing the world that the world needs to know about. For more information, go to explorers.org. Today, I'm joined by Karim Iliya, a photographer, filmmaker, and whale swimming guide whose work has taken him from exploding volcanoes to hidden underwater worlds and even to the brink of space as a selected crew member of the DearMoon Project. Karim's photography films, they all show us worlds we never see. Karim, welcome. You know, I expected to see sort of, for those of you who are looking on YouTube or video, I expected exactly the background I'm looking at right now.
Yeah, I've got some gliders, remote control gliders, and a cello, and another mishmash of other objects that have captivated me, and I like to dive into and just see where they take me.
So you're in Hawaii right now.
Yes, that is correct. I'm visiting my family and spending some time out here.
So your background is really interesting. I think you've told me you grew up somewhere in the Middle East.
Yeah, I was born in England and then moved through Turkey and the Middle East and parts of Asia like India and Korea, and spent really 2 to 4 years in each location before we would move on to the next place. And that has meant that for a long time, I really didn't know where to live and how to settle in any kind of place.
And now you live in Iceland.
Yes, far up in the north of the world.
You know, just sort of reflecting on that background of traveling around the world, what do you think that gave you that other, people may not have seen?
I think it taught me a few things. On a personal level, it taught me how to adapt to new environments and scenarios, to be comfortable in places that I may be not familiar with and that I can problem solve and figure out on the go. Another very valuable lesson it taught me was to see how much of your place and lot in life is just based off of luck and where you're born and who your parents are. And so it helped me realize, even as a young child, that how much we rely on other humans and to really appreciate and value everyone, regardless of whether they are a king or a peasant or a construction worker, regardless of class or wealth or status in society.
I agree with that premise of so much of it is just birth luck. And, I know in my case, I grew up in one place, had parents that seemed very devoted to their kids. And, I didn't worry that my house was going to be bombed or I didn't have food. I always knew I was going to go to college, all of those things. And sometimes when I travel places, could be a Maasai village or it could be someplace else. And I think there's so much unrealized potential around the world for various reasons. And my grandmother, European immigrants on both sides, Italian, German, but my Italian grandmother used to say to me, she had a little writing and she said, "Be careful in choosing companions, choose those who act nobly their part. For remember, the poorest in clothing may cover the noblest heart."
Nice. I like
Yeah.
that.
And so how has that affected you? You're a filmmaker primarily. And so
Yeah,
how has that changed your perspective on how you approach and you're mostly nature, less people, but more nature, right?
yeah, I photograph and film the world around me. I'm more fascinated by nature. I do document the lives of other humans as well. But what has been very exciting about that is I get to step into the world of so many different people and professions. I get to see what is the world like? What is the day like for somebody who helps breed seahorses for a restoration project, or a boat captain up in Svalbard in the far north of the world, or what is it like to be, a person who works with insects or is a mycologist studying mushrooms. And so I get to dive into those worlds in a way that normally you have to dedicate your whole life to. I get to see that and share that story with other people. And the same can be said about the different animals. I'll spend time looking at a type of gecko or lizard or a bird, and trying to figure out what are their patterns like, what is their daily life like, and show them in a way that people don't normally get to see. And one of my favorite things is to really try and photograph animals that are looked over and not appreciated in a new light and a new way so that people get to see them. Like gulls, seagulls and gulls are some of the most underrated animals, and people pay them no attention. But when you really dive into the world that they live in, and you see how they nest on these impossible cliffs that are so steep and windy, and they'll come in through storms just to be in a place where they won't get eaten, is fascinating. And that's the kind of thing that really gives me energy, is showing these hidden worlds that we don't normally have a look at.
It's funny you mentioned seagulls too, because I live pretty close to the water, and seagulls are beautiful birds. I mean, they just are beautiful, nice colorings, nice wing formation from an aesthetic standpoint. But because they're so common, you don't notice them. If it was a rare animal, you'd be like, I saw the most magnificent seagull, right? They're sort of like, and I used to be a lifeguard. We used to call them I'm sorry, yes, sky rats, because there were so many and they were always bombing food and all that. But you're right, they are beautiful. Any other creatures that are underappreciated?
I mean, there's so many creatures that are underappreciated. I think, pigeons are quite fantastic and interesting animals as well. But like you said, it's really just, it's the ones that are common, and that can be wherever you are. So, here in Hawaii, there are so many turtles that when, in certain beaches, when you're surfing, you have to navigate around them to not bump into them. If you're swimming, you physically will bump into a turtle. And so I think people often pay no mind to turtles here, or certain lizards. But, people from other parts of the world, when they come, like, their dream is to see a turtle. And I think that happens wherever you are in the world, with whatever landscape, whatever plants, whatever animals, the ones that are common and they're there all the time, you just don't appreciate it. And you can see this with New Zealanders who are obsessed with squirrels because they've never seen a squirrel. They don't have squirrels there.
Come to New York, my friends. You have plenty of squirrels. Hey, so I mentioned in the beginning the DearMoon Project, and for those who never heard about it, take us through the premise of what it was.
Yeah, the DearMoon Project was a very exciting and ambitious project. It was a Japanese entrepreneur and billionaire who chartered the first Starship rocket flight to bring civilians around the moon. And rather than, just bring in his buddies, he opened it up to artists to apply, of which he selected 8 artists and 2 backup. And so, I saw this opportunity. A friend sent me the thing and said, here's your chance to go to the moon. So I applied, and I got out of around 1 million people, I got selected as one of the photographers to go and document this journey. And it was going to be a 7-day trip, going up in the rocket and going around the moon. And that was it was a very exciting 3 years or so in my life. I got to go to SpaceX. We got invited to rocket launches and meet all kinds of scientists and astrophysicists and engineers and see the SpaceX facility. But ultimately, it was unfortunately canceled. And so
I
now
mean, it
I'm
has
looking
to
for
be a
other ways.
surreal. I'm sorry. It had to be a surreal experience because there was, even in my own life, the whole idea of going into space. I grew up with, the Apollo era. And so, I mean, you're talking about a hand of then, sort of movie star gods going into space. And I don't know if there's anything in your growing up that would have indicated you had any opportunity to go to the moon.
Yeah, I mean there wasn't, right? Because I was born after the Apollo missions, and so we were just not going to the moon. But I've been fascinated by space, and I have spent so much time, documenting, photographing these little pieces on planet Earth, close-up pieces. And I would look up at the moon and I would think, why haven't we gone back there? It's so close. Like it's right there. You can see it with your eyes. You can see the details with your eyes. And then I also kept thinking about how I want to see the Earth, from far away. I want to see the whole Earth in one view, and I want to experience what is that like. I want to take pictures of that and share that with people. So that kind of stuck in my head, and I've been searching for some kind of way to do that. And I think artists will go up and go around the moon, and we will send people to show the wonder of space and this planet. And I hope that that's something that happens in my lifetime and that I can still be a part of that.
How did you find out that you had been selected?
There was a number of interviews and meetings in person, medical checks, psychological checks, all kinds of things. And it was funny because I was in Argentina doing a shoot for the Our Oceans Netflix series, filming orca they would come into this lagoon where there were elephant seals and come up on the shore and take the baby elephant seals and pull them in. And so I was living by the moon's schedule. Every day our meals would shift, I think 40 minutes or so, and our sleep schedule would shift 40 minutes. So I was living by the moon and looking at the moon and constantly aware of the moon, and then went in for one final video call, the final interview, which actually was just the guy funding it, Yusaku Maezawa, telling me that I had been selected, and I had to, harvest the internet of this whole little place, this, the satellite internet. And I was so excited, and there was nobody to tell. There was just the old Argentinian lady who was preparing food, and I was telling her like, Luna, vamos a Luna. We go to the moon, which meant nothing to her, but I think she could see my excitement.
And who was the first person you ultimately called on that?
I called my wife Björk, who wasn't my wife at the time, and I called my cousin, and then I had to tell also one of the producers on the shoot, because I had to tell a person, somebody in person. I had to share this information because then I had to keep it secret for about a year. I couldn't tell anybody.
What?
And so then I was just lying to people because, they'd be like, oh, so like what's happening with the moon? And I would have to say, yeah, I don't know. We're still waiting to find out, almost to the point where I was starting to believe it because I just kept repeating again and again that it was, guess I wasn't selected, or I would have heard something.
Our mission is to empower the next generation of explorers. If you like this podcast, please recommend it to a friend and have them join the expedition. And so when you started going to SpaceX and those kind of facilities, because now you're really going from the artist head to the engineer head, what were your initial impressions on the sort of engineer head? That's a different world, different language.
Fascinating. I see this a lot in when I do, documentary filmmaking and photography, is people who have dedicated their entire life to one thing. And so, diving into the world of SpaceX and seeing these engineers who have put all of their energy and their life, and they're living in a place that they, in Boca Chica, Texas, that they wouldn't normally be living in, and they're there for that work and that craft. And so that's that's quite interesting to see. And, I get to hang out with people during the process of DearMoon. I got to hang out with Tim Dodd, who runs a YouTube channel called Everyday Astronaut, where he teaches people about space and rockets. So at that point, then I just try and learn and absorb as much as possible from other people to see, what do they know and what does their world look like.
Did you meet any of the Apollo astronauts?
I did not meet any of the Apollo astronauts there, but I was thrown into the world of space where I met a number of astronauts, both from current eras and past eras, and people who were going up into space, and that was pretty exciting to then, normally, in the past, if I met somebody who worked at NASA, I would be like, wow, look at this, a person who works at NASA. But, during this DearMoon project, they would just be introducing us to, this is the VP of Starship, and this is, an astronaut that's going, Sunita Williams, who went up onto the ISS and was stuck there for a little while. They're like, this is Sunita Williams. So it was really great to just be put into that world, and put into that world where people were also curious and would ask us questions. And, there was a conversation there. So it was very exciting.
Buzz Aldrin is the honorary president of the Explorers Club.
Okay.
Did you know that?
Yeah. I didn't know that, actually. I knew he was part of the Explorers Club, but I didn't know he was the honorary president.
And it's interesting too, because I've had lengthy conversations with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, and different personalities. There was an aspect of the Apollo, especially the guys who walked on the moon, and I don't want to say it was an Asperger's type thing, but these guys were so in control of their emotions. I once asked Buzz Aldrin, I said, when you look up at the moon, what do you think? And he goes, I know I should be thinking something very deep and poetic. He goes, but I don't really think about very much at all. And I'm like, wow, man, you walked on it. You were on that first mission to the moon. And it's sort of just, he said he just had a game plan. In fact, famously, one of the reasons Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had a falling out is there are literally no photos of Neil Armstrong on the moon other than a reflection in Buzz Aldrin's visor and those very grainy things of him coming down the ladder. Buzz Aldrin didn't take any pictures of him.
That has broken up many a friendship, hasn't it?
Well, imagine
you
coming
don't take
back
enough
from your
photos.
trip and getting your photos back and going, where the hell am I?
Yeah, why didn't he take any photos?
Well, he said that he had a shot list and nothing was on there that he saw. So these guys just followed everything. These were not artists.
Yes. Well, then it brings up the curiosity. What happens when you do send artists into space, into the moon?
So then when did you was there a period that you could tell people you were going?
Yes. Then there was a public announcement. And then, I put it online, and I was on the news in Iceland because there's only a few news channels. So they had me on the news. And that was quite fun. I still get people saying, like, have you gone? When are you going to the moon? And then I have to tell them, actually, it's been canceled.
And so what was it like? How did you find out that it was canceled?
Got a letter as I landed in Svalbard. Yeah, which was not that fun. And then we had a group call meeting. I'm still, I'm still looking for ways, maybe not all the way to the moon right away, but I think I have been thrown into this world of space, and I still get invited to different, conferences and events like Space for a Better World and these kinds of things where I go and I meet people. And so I think my chances of going up into space are far greater than they were before this DearMoon project, because I've been vetted, I've been cleared medically and psychologically and mentally, exactly. And hopefully that counts for something. But what about you? Have you thought about going up into space? Is that something you want to do?
To go on those suborbital flights doesn't really interest me all that much. All the astronauts that I know that have circled the Earth all have the same comment on the overview effect. They said it's this powerful, powerful feeling that when you look down on the Earth and you notice that every person who's ever lived, right there, borders melt away. I guess I would I'd like to, yes, if I could orbit the Earth, and that may be in the cards for me. And, certainly going to the moon would be fascinating. I'm actually fascinated with my iPhone trying to get a good picture of the moon. There's something, I don't know if you know this term, but it's called the full moon illusion. Like all of us have seen a full moon coming over the horizon, especially here in Hawaii. It just looks ginormous, right? It just looks like, wow. It looks so everybody.
It's your brain just making it bigger.
It's exactly right. It's an optical illusion. It's a trick of your brain. We perceive things on the horizon as closer and larger than we do above. So it's one of the most counterintuitive things you ever see.
Yeah, I love it. I love things like that where your logical brain knows one thing, but your emotional brain doesn't agree with it. And so the moon is just bigger.
So you and I have actually talked about this. I think we were in the Middle East. We're in
Dubai.
Dubai, yeah. God, that is so bad when you can't even remember where you were 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. But we were in Dubai and we were talking about filmmaking, right? And there's also the business end of filmmaking, right? There's the creative side and there's the business. What are your observations on where filmmaking's going and the business aspect of it?
I think it's one of the fastest changing industries, which makes it both very complicated to keep up and can be daunting and difficult. Photography and filmmaking, it moves so quickly. One thing that is good is it does drive us to adapt and be creative and make changes, but it can be frustrating also. And, I think there's people whose jobs won't exist anymore. And so I used to think like, I'll be insulated from the AI stuff because, as a wildlife photographer, filmmaker, that should be fairly safe. But what I didn't think about right away is that all those people whose jobs were affected will move into the spaces where they, that are left over. So, it is interesting to see how we've started with films, silent films, and then we, horizontal films. And now we've moved into this shorter and shorter content where you have to just grab people's attention right away. So I'm not sure what will happen with that landscape, but I have noticed that, in the past, when I first started photographing humpback whales and filming them, any image of a whale blew people's minds. They loved it. That was just this thing that they'd never seen. And nowadays, the level is so high, what you have to have of a humpback whale to get people's attention or to have them look at it for more than a few seconds.
It has to be like breaching while mating.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder what that does to us to be so, to have all of this content to be so desensitized to this incredible nature, that shows up on our screens. Will we go back to, I have no idea. I don't know. What do you think will happen with all of this? Well, you were in the film world as well.
Yeah. So there is a democratization of the film world. When I was coming up, equipment was super expensive. It was just out of the reach of almost anybody. So unless you worked for a network that had the equipment, you just didn't have the access to it. And so things gotten smaller, lighter. I think drones were, just such a great boom to making beautiful images. I guess I worry, I was talking to a filmmaker friend just yesterday, and I said that filmmaking of nature takes hours. There's just no two ways around it. You've got to be patient. You've got to spend hours and earn it. And I said, though, when you actually see somebody's project, you compress the time, right? It seems like more action's going on all the time. And you just happen to be there. But I can see a point, and I know that in the past when I've done films, like say a great sunset, that would have been, sort of a good end of a scene or a shot. I'm just using stock footage because to sit there and devote an hour to having a camera pointed at the horizon just takes you away from other things. So you wonder if people say they're doing something on caribou, that some of those great herd shots may now be AI. And then, you go into it's hard to say where that line goes. In one sense, I feel like there is still great mystery in the world, and so many beautiful images, even on a very micro level. You mentioned squirrels and seagulls. You could do a film just in this little world of shoreline on a seagull, and it could be a really beautiful, fascinating thing. But because people's attention spans are so goddamn short, I don't know. I mean, I think as a business, it's tough. And I think, you have to sort of understand how corporate involvement, works on it. And the other thing is, you have to say, am I better specializing, or I'm better off being a generalist?
Yeah. Yeah. I struggle with do I please the algorithm? Do I give the internet what they want? If I want people to see the stuff that I do, I post a picture of a whale, but I might have a picture of a bird or a lizard or something that is far more interesting than a whale, that specific photo. And when I put it on the internet, people don't seem to care about it, because the way that it's set up is it feeds into, what you already have going on. And that, I think there's a big risk in it changes the way people film. I mean, I see many filmmaker friends and colleagues that now they just film in vertical, which seems like a totally absurd
I can't do that.
To do. I can't do it either.
Yeah. To me, that's like, and again, for people who are just sort of listening, most of sort of like Facebook or Instagram or TikTok is shot with your camera, in a vertical position, whereas filmmakers always shoot in a horizontal position, which tends to be less convenient, at least on the controls on a phone, or sometimes, cameras are sort of set up horizontal.
I think when we look at the documentaries in the future, of that go through time, I think this vertical video thing will be a little weird blip that they're like, that's odd, where there'll be a segment of time where everything's in vertical and it'll go back to horizontal. And my thought is just that this idea of a little thing that we do everything with our thumbs in our hand, I don't think this is permanent. I think we'll eventually move to, glasses with augmented reality, this like a much more advanced version of the Apple Vision Pro or, Google Glass, something like that. And then we'll be back to horizontal again. Yeah. So I think in the long term, I do still film in horizontally. I think the world looks better horizontally, unless you're, looking at the world like this. But
so Karim, I've actually heard you speak a few times, and you have great images, which, when people sit there, I can see their faces reacting to it. But I also think that you're a good storyteller when you speak. People are interested in what you have to say. And, what is it that makes a good storyteller a great storyteller?
What a question. I mean, I guess when you think back to like what is storytelling, it is maybe one of the older forms of communication that we have.
Oldest, maybe.
Yeah. And telling stories about something that happened, or making up stories, telling something that hasn't happened or something that might happen. Some people have that art form with verbally, and they can tell stories. For me, telling stories is just trying to take people away from where they are currently and bring them into a situation, bring them into the story. So if I'm telling someone about volcanoes and the story of being around a volcano, then what I try and do is to describe the details and the feelings and the things you see. Instead of saying like, oh, we saw a volcano and it was erupting and we walked there, it was amazing. I'll talk about what it looks like when you heat rock up enough and it starts to glow in the dark, and there's this pull towards it that you just want, even though it's dangerous, you want to go closer and closer, and it draws you in, and you hear the crackling sounds and the rumbling feelings, and there's this visceral feeling in your body that makes you, anxious but excited at the same time. And I think you can pull people into these worlds, and you can do that through visuals, and you can do that through words. And if you can remove someone from the situation and make them feel like they were there, I think that's the essence of storytelling.
Storytelling or speaking publicly wasn't something I was initially good at. And, I used to ask a lot of questions. But I think the biggest step forward for me was when you could get rid of notes and really just look at your audience, because you can see body in a theater type thing, you can see body language and you can see people leaning forward, sitting back. And it sort of dictates how you speed through or hang on to certain moments. But I think when you actually have a camera, it's a different headspace because you don't have that audience there. I mean, can you differentiate between the two as an artist versus a performer?
Yeah, I mean, I still get nervous when doing, talks or presentations and in front of people. And like you said, it's one of those things where practice and you become more comfortable. I think when filming and photographing, what I feel quite lucky about is the things that I find interesting and the things that I find look good and captivate me the most generally also resonates with a large amount of people. And so when, telling those stories and when crafting that and piecing it together and making a film or outputting something, I look at it and I think like, is this interesting? And if it is, then I put it there. And I think a lot of that is usually just, is it something that people have seen before? How do you show it in a new way? The other night I got this UV light. And I started looking around the garden and all of these tiny little white millipedes just start glowing under the UV light. And so I went in and started to photograph these little creatures in a way that you don't normally get to see because we don't emit UV light. And I think, it's really just about that, trying to find these things that are uncommon, and then sharing that with people.
I also think when you get into a photographer or cinematographer head, light and shape take on different meanings. You start really noticing things to either you're saying, oh God, I wish I had my camera with me, or you start you start framing things in your head and say, wow, what a great shot, whether it's a dog running or, a seagull flying, you notice shapes versus stuff. We're just about out of time, but I just want to ask you, since you really are a citizen of the world, I mean, you've lived different continents. What's the value of the community that you sort of hold? Because I have to imagine that you have a community, not just in Hawaii or in Iceland, but you have a community around the world. And so how important is that explorer community to you?
Yeah, sometimes it feels tough because the closest people in my life are scattered all across the planet. And I feel lucky that, I get to have this technology that allows me to, see them on video or to be able to get on planes and go and visit them. And so in some sense, when I travel around the world, there's people like I get to see that are important in my life in various places. On the other hand, it's so good to have community in a place that you're in. I've been trying to, for most of my life, my community was spread out. And now I've been trying to also build community in Iceland so that when I go back home, there's people around me that I care deeply about. But it opens up so many interesting things because there's fascinating people doing amazing things all over the world. And if you can go and see what their life is like and experience that, I think it makes you into a more open-minded person who can look from different perspectives. So for those who have that chance, it's great. And, for those that don't know people spread out around the world, it can be a great opportunity to, if you are traveling and if you're in different places, even if it's just in the next town over, I think it's so important to, strike up those conversations and say yes to things and just be open to different experiences.
If you look at your life as a book, they say for those who don't travel, they read but one chapter. You're right. It's the people you meet along the way.
Yeah.
All right, Karim, thank you so much. I mean, really interesting perspective. I hope you get an opportunity to go to the moon.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure to talk to you again, Richard.
Always. I hope you enjoyed our podcast. Now we have a little favor to ask. We'd really appreciate your support, so make sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss another episode. See you out on the trail.